Alright, everybody, welcome back. This is Bare Bones Talk on Monday, December, I believe it's 9th of 2019. So, everybody's talking about the impeachment, and as usual, I am avoiding that because who cares what everybody else is doing? We're doing our own damn thing up in this joint. And what we're talking about today is nuclear war, because that's big and scary and horrible. So, I've been doing some thinking about that lately for a couple of reasons, and it occurs to me that in my lifetime we have gone from being very concerned about this particular topic to really not even thinking about it all that much. I grew up in the 1980s, that was my teen years, and we were painfully aware of the threat of nuclear annihilation back in that time because the Cold War was still going and just about to wrap up. We were at the height of it, pop culture, movies, etc. were doing their thing, and of course the phone is going to ring. Hang on just a second, people. That was the hospital calling me. I'm trying to get some procedures and tests and such set up, and I had to take the call. So anyway, we were definitely big on worrying about what was going to happen if nukes started flying back in the day. Why is my camera all bendy? What is up with that? Okay, I'm going to try and move so I'm more in front of the camera-ish. Maybe that's a little better. Okay, so, we had a lot going on, and we were absolutely terrified of what would happen, and we were much, more aware of it maybe than people are today. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what happens when a nuke goes off, why this is important to know, what political impact this stuff has, what contributes to us remaining a nuclear-armed planet, that kind of thing, and maybe run some simulations on what it would be like if a nuke went off where some of us live or in a major population center, so we can get a feel for just what a nightmare this is and talk about the after effects of it as well. So let's start with this video I got on the camera here about what happens when a nuclear bomb hits. And what I want you to keep in mind when they talk about this is that the example they're giving is a 10 kiloton bomb, which is 3 kilotons smaller than the little boy bomb that was used on Hiroshima. So this is a drastic underestimation of what would happen if a nuclear bomb were to go off in this fashion, because this is smaller by about 25% than the bomb that went off in Hiroshima. So let's take a listen and see what we learned today.
One of the greatest misconceptions about nuclear bombs is that they instantly annihilate everything in sight. But the fallout from a nuclear blast actually has layers. When it explodes, it leaves in its wake a kind of destruction that's both fast and slow, and one whose devastation stretches much farther and lingers far longer than many might suspect. Here's what actually happens when a nuclear bomb hits.
Spooky.
For the sake of example, imagine a 10 kiloton nuclear bomb goes off in Times Square. The moment it detonates, a white flash is visible for miles. The light is so bright that, for a moment, people as far away as Queens and Newark can't see. At the same time, scorching heat radiates outward from the explosion site, followed by a massive fireball. The core of the fireball is tens of millions of degrees, as hot as the center of the sun. There are few survivors within a half-mile radius of the blast. Buildings and vegetation in that same range ignite or char. The bomb disrupts gas lines, burns structures and power lines, and knocks out communication towers and cell phones within about 1.6 miles.
Flying glass and debris are immediate danger, so stay where you are until you're sure it's safe to move.
A colossal wave of pressure follows the fireball, traveling at the speed of sound and producing winds as fast as 500 miles per hour.
So keep in mind as you think about that 500 miles per hour is more than 3 times faster than wind has to be registered at in order to classify as a Class 5 hurricane, which we've seen devastate the coastline of the United States several times in the last decade or two. So this 3 times that kind of wind speed. Just keep that in mind as you're paying attention to this.
Told the explosion creates a crater 50 feet deep and a shockwave of about 3.2 miles, reaching south to Gramercy Park, north to the Met, and east and west into the Hudson. Residual pressure shatters windows, and piles of rubble as tall as 30 feet tower within a half-mile radius of Times Square.
Okay, so when you're thinking about that pressure wave that shatters glass, keep in mind that doesn't mean the glass just calmly falls out of the window pane. That glass turns into shrapnel that will, eviscerate anybody that it's sent flying into, okay?
This has all happened in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, in the days and hours after the initial explosion, a plume of fallout travels in a single direction away from the blast site. The plume could, for example, settle up the eastern seaboard, leaving radioactive dust on everything in its path. The most radioactive region of the plume could reach about 20 miles to New Rochelle. A much larger but less radioactive region of the plume, known as the hot zone, could extend about 60 miles north to Monroe, Connecticut.
Now large amounts of pulverized debris and molten earth are pulled up into the mushroom cloud. The radioactive atoms produced in the explosion join with the particles of earth and debris. The mushroom-shaped cloud forms and climbs higher.
The first pulse of radiation wreaks biological warfare at the molecular level of everyone outside or in weakly insulated buildings, altering the structure of key cellular machinery and injuring DNA, so that within minutes, people begin to feel nauseous and dizzy and begin to experience headaches and vomiting. Then, anywhere from several days and 2 weeks, symptoms of those exposed to radiation worsen. In severe cases, infected people will become delirious, emaciated, and incapacitated. In most cases, people with radiation sickness die in one of 2 ways. Their immune system is no longer able to fight infection, or their digestive system becomes too damaged to function. Those who survive...
So I want you to think about that for a second. Your digestive system becomes too damaged to function. That means no matter what you eat, your body can't process it, and you literally starve to death, even though you're still capable of eating.
Do so by seeking shelter, ideally in a strong underground structure like a basement, a tunnel, or a parking garage. Fallout from a nuclear blast is extremely dangerous at first, but the danger decreases rapidly. Within 24 to 72 hours of the explosion, it's safe for survivors to reemerge. Theoretically, a bomb of this size would kill about 250,000 people and injure roughly 300,000 more.
So what we're talking about here is in the neighborhood of 550,000 deaths from a bomb smaller than the one that took out Hiroshima.
20 times more deadly than any act of terrorism or natural disaster in all of America's history. And if in this hypothetical scenario, the bomb had been dropped from the sky instead of detonated on the ground, the number of fatalities would have soared.
So that's the difference between a ground burst and an air burst. Nuclear weapons are at their most devastating when they explode at an altitude so they can rain death and destruction down from above where there are fewer intervening obstacles that might save people. A ground burst, every building between you and the center of the blast is some amount of cover that decreases the effect that will eventually reach you. I mean, it's probably not going to save you if you're in anything like close proximity, but when there's an airburst, there's no hiding from it.
For context, consider this. This hypothetical scenario is a small-scale example. A larger nuke, like the 300 kiloton warheads that countries like, say, China or Russia possess, would kill at least 1.2 million and injure an additional 2 million more.
All these factors must be considered as we plan for the survival of our homes, our families, and our nation in the nuclear age.
So I just wanted people to have some kind of feel for that. So here's the question. When you hear that, if I don't know how many people we have in the channel right now, but if there's anybody here listening, tell me, how does that compare to what you thought happened when a nuclear weapon detonates? And keeping in mind, that's a very tiny one. That's smaller than the smallest one that's ever been used in warfare. I'm kind of curious to know what people think. The picture in the background, by the way, is a graphic goofing on Trump's thought about nuking hurricanes, because that's not a very useful suggestion. So while you're thinking about that... Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Bip. Let's switch away and let's talk about nuclear weapon attacks here. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the little boy. This is what they were talking about in New York if we use a surface burst. This is a website called Nuke Map. It's a very scary thing there, but this is the devastation zone in New York City if this were to happen. Okay, and that's for the little boy size bomb. But if you take a look at what nuclear weapons we have in the U.S. arsenal right now, if you look at things like the W-88 warhead, and those are 12 to a missile, keep in mind, in a Trident II, that is just a frightening amount. But let's take a look at this, what the W-88 and the larger B-83 can do. So we're looking at 475 kilotons, right? So let's take a look at that. And then if you take a look, now we're talking about a devastation zone that crosses the rivers. This, where the mouse is right now, if you take a look, this where the mouse is right now is where the hypothetical in that video ended. And this is one of the, let's see, that's yielding kilotons 475. There we go, the Minuteman missile. Let's just use that bit. This is the devastation zone extending way past the rivers into New Jersey, into Long Island. You know, the air blast radius, shattering glass, lacerating people, causing bloody death. I mean, it's hellish. And again, this is not even the most powerful weapon in the U.S. arsenal. If we go back to this other item here, let's see, the most powerful, where is it? Most powerful U.S. pure fission bomb. So what we're looking at here, most powerful U.S. weapon in active service, 1,200 kilotons. Let's look at that. 1,200. Okay, look how wide this devastation area is. This is crazy. Can you guys see the map now? You should be able to see it now. And of course, for those of you who think that Russian stuff is neat, we can go all the way up to the Tsar Bomba, I believe. There it is. This is the largest bomb ever designed. This one was not actually tested, But let's see what this would do to the greater New York area. And mind you, this is an airburst, but it would be delivered by missile, presumably, or bomber if it were fired at the United States. So this would take out all of New York City, about half of Long Island, all of northeastern New Jersey, a huge swath into New York, and reaching all the way to Bridgeport, Connecticut, just with the thermal radiation, which would leave everybody in that area covered in third-degree burns, probably dying of infection. And this is not counting the radiation deaths that would follow it, right? So this is just unreal, how devastating these are. When you think about what conventional bombs and explosives will do, even really massive ones like the one that was used in the Oklahoma City bombing, they were enough to annihilate an entire building and cause hundreds of deaths, but they are almost inconsequential compared to what you see from nuclear weapons. So this is what we're talking about, but the situation is actually even worse than you might think, okay? Because most of the major nuclear-armed countries have discussed and discarded what's called a no first use policy. And what that means is that they agree that yes, they have nuclear weapons, but they will not initiate a nuclear first strike in order to... The one Tsar Bomba was tested, but there was a bigger design, a Tsar Bomba 2, that was designed but never built or tested. But the no first use says, we will not launch a first strike with these, and the major nuclear-armed nations, including the United States, have refused to agree to that. A no first use policy would mean that they would only retaliate with nuclear weapons, whereas a first use nation will initiate combat with nukes if it so chooses. And that's a terrifying thought as well. Hello, Caedmon. Now, the reason I put up the title that I did and talked about Trump having access to nukes is because, remember, we are talking about a guy who literally suggested nuking a storm system. So this is not somebody who has a really clear grasp of what nuclear weapons are, what they can and can't do, or what would be a justifiable or even remotely justifiable reason for deploying one. When he made that suggestion, his chief of staff and the national security advisor vehemently said, no, that's a really, crappy idea. And he literally said to them, why not? Like, he could not grasp, without multiple explanations from people, that this would not work and this was a horrible idea. So this is the man that we have currently carrying, the launch authority for the United States. And what we have now is he has this guy following him around from the Secret Service who has this suitcase with him called the Football, which allows him to initiate nuclear launch commands wherever he is. The guy with the football is never more than about 25 steps from the president at any given time, regardless of who the president is, because, if nuclear war happens, responses need to be made, But having that football within easy reach of someone who thinks that nuking a storm is a good idea is kind of a terrifying prospect, right? So let's take a look at where, you might get nuked if you live in the United States. So these are targets that any foreign power, probably the Russians, would attack first with nukes if they were going to go to war against us, in order to try to reduce our strategic response capabilities. Strategic response meaning nuclear missiles, nuclear subs, long-range bombers, long-range communications, things like that allow... Thank you, Caedmon. That allow a strategic or wide-scale response to an external threat. This is not to say that those are the only targets that would be nuked. Any place with a military base would get nuked. Any place with an oil refinery would get nuked. Any place where there are large stockpiles of national resources. Any place where there are large numbers of agricultural distribution centers or farming areas. to cripple our ability to feed our public. Major urban centers, major urban center water processing plants, anything that allows the population to survive is going to be a target. As well as essentially every state capital, the national capital, any military installation of any kind is likely to get nuked. National Guard in order to limit responses. All this stuff is going to be smoldering craters if nukes ever fly. But the question is it really nuclear war that's likely to end up with us accidentally blowing ourselves to smithereens, or is it just a grand fuck up that's going to be what's likely to do us in? And there's a lot to unpack there. Some of you are aware of close call accidents the United States has had, but you may not be aware of just how close we've actually come and just how bad our command and control systems are for this stuff. And because storytelling and humor makes for a great instructional method, it's no surprise that humor has been used as a way to give people information about that. And one of the best examples of it was on John Oliver's Last Week Tonight. And I'm going to show you the John Oliver episode about this, and we're going to discuss bits of it as we go, because this is actually an incredibly good explanation of a lot of these points. So let's take a look at this, and maybe we'll get some laughs out of it too, but there's a lot of scary information in here. And if any ads pop up, I'll try to scoot past them.
Is the threat of nuclear annihilation. It's probably been a while since you thought about it, but there was a time when people lived in almost constant fear. Children used to be shown this in schools.
Sundays, holidays, vacation time, we must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover.
So yeah, that's pretty stupid. Obviously, duck and cover doesn't do anything. But this was at a time when most people had no idea how nuclear bombs worked. They just knew that it had ended the war in Japan, a few years earlier, and that it was incredibly devastating. But you have to keep in mind, the idea of a nuclear weapon had only existed on the planet for about 5 years in 1950, when ads like this started showing up. So literally nobody knew what they were talking about. They just knew it was really dangerous.
Say this for the 1950s. They had the perfect blend of optimism and pessimism. The death blast is coming, but we'll survive it if we all get under this picnic blanket.
Yeah.
Now, by the 1980s, attitudes had changed. The TV movie The Day After had a slightly different tone.
And he's not kidding. When I was a teenager, we were now painfully aware of just how deadly these weapons were. And the world at large was terrified because the Cold War had been going on for decades, and, the Russians were absolutely our enemies. They still are, but, our president treats them like, he's a sock puppet for Putin. But that's a whole other discussion. But the threat of nuclear annihilation was incredibly real. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us within literal minutes of the world ending, not long before I was a teenager. Just a few years, maybe 10 or 12 years before I was a teenager. And pop culture in the 80s, movies, TV, a lot of it had to do with addressing our fears of nuclear conflict. And he's going to show you one called The Day After, which is about survivors of a nuclear war. But he was not kidding when we went from the duck and cover and thinking blankets were a good idea to what you're about to see here.
See if you can spot it.
Danny!
The worst thing is, Danny would have been fine if he just had a picnic blanket with him. What were you thinking, you little fool? The strange thing is, all of that seems so dated. Nowadays, we spend less time worrying about nuclear annihilation than we do worrying about whether we accidentally hit reply all on an office email. Oh.
And he's right about that. These days, you hear about global warming, you hear about political stuff all the time, but these nuclear weapons are still out there. It's just that they've become such a normalized thing that we don't talk about it anymore, despite the fact that we are, at times, moments away from ending human civilization and don't even realize how close to the precipice we are.
Shit, did I send that to Dave? I said his face looks like a ferret. But maybe we should be worrying about nuclear warheads a bit more. And not the ones in North Korea, Iran, or Russia, but the ones we have here at home. America has around 4,800 nuclear warheads, which is more than enough, not just to destroy Earth, but to provide 4th of July fireworks for Martians. Some of our most powerful weapons are intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yes, right now Russia has more warheads than we do.
Which is both an acronym and what you would say if you saw one coming at you. That's a little joke for all you gastroenterologists out there. They are currently in silos in Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota. And let's start with Wyoming. How well are we taking care of it?
And this is going to scare the shit out of you.
This enormous outer door designed to protect the corridor leading to the capsule. They can't close it because of a broken part, so it's propped open with a crowbar and marked with a danger tag.
Okay.
So just think about that for a second. This is an actual nuclear silo where the door that's supposed to keep mayhem from happening to the actual nuke literally cannot be closed, is propped open with a hand tool, and nobody has cared enough to fix it for so long that it's got a handwritten danger tag hanging on it.
To be honest, repairs like that are less appropriate in a nuclear silo than they are in a divorced dad's condo. Why does the fridge open with string, Daddy? And for the record, it's not just their hardware that needs updating, it's their software.
Oh God, look at this.
Too.
The equipment is ancient. This, for example, is one of the computers that would receive a launch order from the president. It uses floppy disks, the really old, big ones.
Holy shit! Those things barely look powerful enough to run Oregon Trail. Much less Earth-ending weaponry. People who work
Scary,
there
right?
must watch war games and go, one day we'll get to play with that stuff. Look, fingers crossed things are a little better in North Dakota.
17 Air Force officers are being relieved of their duties controlling nuclear missiles.
An inspection in March tested the group's missile launch proficiency. They were rated as marginal, the equivalent of earning a D grade, barely passing.
That's not great. I do really think when it comes to safeguarding the deadliest objects ever known to mankind, we should really insist on something more in a solid B+, C- range. Okay, finally, let's look at Montana. The good news, their officers have not had D grades. The bad news is why.
34 U.S. Air Force nuclear launch officers have been stripped of their certification.
4 months ago, a launch officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana allegedly texted the answers to a monthly proficiency test to other officers at the base.
They texted the answers. Those answers should not be textable. You should not be able to answer, how do you prevent the launch of a Minuteman III with emojis? It has to be more...
I love that. Rocket to Russia equals sad face. But this is a real problem. We were concerned about this in the movie he referenced, War Games. I don't know how many of you have actually seen it, but I have the opening bit from this queued up here so you can see this. The basic premise of that movie, and I'm going to spoil the shit out of it for you, and I don't really care because it's on topic here. But after testing nuclear launch officers, like the two guys you're about to see on screen, they're discovered to be found incapable of performing their duties, not because they're incompetent, but simply because of the moral question of, can you actually expect people to willingly kill 20 million people with the push of a button and not balk at it? And this is the entire opening sequence for this. And the consequence of this failure is they put the nuclear arsenal of the United States in control of a computer that goes haywire for reasons I'll explain later. But let's take a look at this so you can see what we're talking about. And this is remarkably accurate, by the way. They have the giant door that keeps their launch room safe, etc. The door that's propped open in reality with a crowbar.
Mother's been very worried about you guys. The roads must be a bear, huh?
What roads?
Visibility. Visibility? Bullshit. You guys haven't been on time for the last 6 months. Well, I wrote you guys up in the logbook.
Yeah, you're a prince, Bevan.
Good night, gentlemen.
So this is just crazy, what you're about to see here. This was what scared people in the 1980s because we knew how possible, how plausible this really was.
It's like Sensimilla, right?
Sensimilla? This grass-made Thai stick tastes like oregano. Lay you out flat, man.
Got a red light, sir.
What on?
Number 8, warhead alarm.
Give a thump with your finger.
Even back then, we knew the hardware was falling apart.
Alarm reset.
Skybird, this is Dropkick with a Red Dash Alpha message in 2 parts. Break. Red Dash Alpha.
Stand by to
Red
copy
Dash
message.
Alpha.
Standing by.
Romeo, Oscar, November, Charlie, Tango, Lima, Alpha. Authentication 22040 Delta Lima.
I have a valid message. Stand by to authenticate.
I agree with authentication also, sir.
Enter launch code.
Entering launch code.
Launch order confirmed.
Holy shit. Target selection complete. Time on target sequence complete. Yield selection complete.
Begin countdown. T-minus 60.
All right, let's do it. Insert launch key.
Stand by. Launch key inserted.
Roger. On my mark. Rotate launch key to set. 3, 2, 1. Mark.
T-minus 50.
Roger, that's set. Sir.
T-minus 40.
Enable missiles.
Number 1 enabled. 2 enabled. 3 enabled. 4,
Straight
5,
somebody in the goddamn
6,
phone.
7, 8, 9, 10. All missiles enabled.
Minus 30.
Get me wing command post on your direct
That's
line.
not the correct procedure, Captain.
SAC. Try SAC headquarters on the HF.
That's not the correct procedure.
Screw the procedure. I want somebody on the goddamn phone before I kill 20 million people.
T-minus 20.
I got nothing here. They might have been knocked out already.
Right. On my mark, rotate launch keys to launch.
Roger, ready to go to launch.
14.
13, 12, 11.
7. 6. 5.
Sir, we have a launch
4,
order.
3.
Put your hand on the keys,
2,
sir.
1. Launch.
Sir, we are at launch. Turn your keys.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Turn your keys, sir.
So what you find out in the movie is that wasn't real. That was a test they put these guys through, and one of them simply couldn't bring himself to kill 20 million people without some kind of confirmation, and the other one was ready to kill him for not being willing to do it. You know what the problem with that is, Pearl, is for mutual assured destruction to mean anything, you have to be willing to count on both the people on your side and the people on the other side to be acting rationally. Like, one of the flaws in it, the United States subscribes to a policy called spoil sport warfare, and I don't know if you know what that means, but I'm going to explain it. What it means is, in the event that something would happen like an invasion of the United States, and the United States looked like it was about to lose, that as a, in kind of a spoil sport fit, that the American leadership would nuke everybody rather than let the United States fall to a foreign power. They would literally blow up the world rather than let the United States fall and end the human race. And that is actually the United States policy. That's our actual position. And, that goes doubly for any leader that's crazy and wants to stay in power, like your Kim Jong-un from North Korea. If he gets his hands on a viable nuclear arsenal and it looks like he's ever about to get ousted from power, he'll kill everybody he can before he goes out. And he'll make sure people know that's likely, for what you were talking about, the mutually assured destruction thing. But there comes a point where a leader is so horrible that the rest of the world wants to take action to save the people of that nation from their leader. And, there's also just the idea that somebody might just be nuts. I mean, I'm not a big fan of President Trump. And if you ask any psychologist who's watched the way he behaves, they'll tell you there's a strong likelihood the guy has narcissistic personality disorder, which means he regards himself as important and everybody else isn't even real to him. So if something happens like he gets impeached, and, it's likely that he will get removed from office. And I'm not saying that's the way things are actually going to go, but if that looks like it's inevitable, it is very possible for someone like him to decide that that's so insulting and that his ego has been so wounded that he'd rather nuke the parts of the country that have, for example, Democrat populations, rather than accept the ruling of the court and leave office. He could just, at any day, Trump could leave office and go back to just being a rich guy who gets to lead a hedonistic lifestyle and do whatever he wants. But if you have narcissistic personality disorder, it's not enough, So you have somebody like Trump, a more extreme case, Kim Jong-un, who would gladly kill everybody they can rather than surrender power. That movie was not based on entirely true events. It was based on the fact that we knew about tests of launch officers that failed. But the rest of the movie, where the military puts control of nukes into the hands of an AI, is not correct. Because the thing is, when it comes to nuclear war, any nuclear war, even a very small one, is likely to end the world as we know it. And that actually brings me to the next video that I want us to look at here, which is from a guy who studied nuclear war and nuclear policy since Carl Sagan was alive, if you know who he was, a very famous scientist. And he's the guy who brought it to the leadership of both the then Soviet Union and the United States in the 80s, what a deadly threat nuclear weapons were, not just to the enemies you launched them at, but to the world at large once they've been used, and was one of the backing forces that got the nuclear proliferation treaties into effect and started the drawdown of the world's nuclear arsenals. So you should listen to what this guy has to say, because any nuclear exchange is likely to end humanity entirely, and people don't seem to realize it. So let's listen to what we have here.
66 million years ago, a mountain-sized asteroid traveling 10 times faster than a bullet from an assault rifle slammed into the shallow seas covering what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The immense energy of that impact hurled rocks as far north as Canada, and it vaporized the asteroid, part of Mexico and part of the shallow sea. glowing hot fireball of vaporized rock and water rose far above the Earth's atmosphere and spread over the planet. As it cooled, molten drops of rock about the size of a grain of sand solidified into an immense swarm of shooting stars. The shooting stars re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and heated the upper atmosphere to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Standing at the ground, the dinosaurs saw the blue sky become a sheet of red-hot lava. The scientific artist, David Hardy, imagines the fate of the dinosaurs in this painting. They broiled to death under the glowing skies. The energy in the sky is like that in the glow bar in an electric oven. If you're dying to experience what the dinosaurs did when they died, turn your oven on broil and hop in. The glowing skies started everything on fire. Great clouds of smoke rose into the upper atmosphere and blocked the sun so that no sunlight reached the ground. It became cold and dark. Photosynthesis stopped, and plants and animals in the ocean or on the land either starved or froze to death.
In case you're not aware, photosynthesis is the chemical process that plants use to turn water and sunlight into the food that keeps them alive and lets them grow. So photosynthesis stops because there's not enough light, not enough warmth. The plant life on the planet is going to basically all die out. You know, there will be some stragglers, some very tough plants that survive on minimum light and heat and water. But most of it's just gone.
The dinosaurs didn't do anything wrong that caused their death. It was just fate that an asteroid hit the Earth and killed 70% of the species that we know of on the planet. Unfortunately, in our lifetimes, we may experience the same fate as the dinosaurs. But I'm not talking about another asteroid collision. I'm talking about a nuclear war. A nuclear war would have many of the same phenomena that the dinosaurs experienced. But this time, it absolutely would be our fault. Fortunately, there are things that we can do to prevent this from happening. If you live in a city that has a military base, there's a missile that's aimed at you right now. If you live in a city that has an important industry, a major university, a large airport, an oil refinery, or oil storage facilities, there is a hydrogen bomb that's aimed at you right now. We live in a perilous era. There are 15,000 nuclear weapons on the planet, and the 9 nuclear weapon states are in conflict with each other. The United States and North Korea, NATO and Russia, India and Pakistan. We're just one misunderstanding, one mistake, or one fanatic politician away from a nuclear conflict. In the Second World War, fleets of hundreds or even 1,000 airplanes were used to bomb a single city. But with the invention of the atomic bomb, only one airplane and one bomb was needed. The Enola Gay carried one atomic bomb with the power of 15,000 tons of TNT. And when it dropped that bomb on Hiroshima, Japan, 100,000 people died.
Now I want you to really take a good look at what Hiroshima looked like after that bomb went off. Try to imagine any city you've ever been to in your life just not being there anymore. Just the shells of some burned out buildings and mostly flat land, empty land, razed down to the dirt, where an entire thriving piece of civilization used to be. And nothing but rubble and dust and dead people everywhere. And that's just Hiroshima. That's the smallest bomb that's ever been used in an actual conflict. I mean, look into the distance and see just how far away that devastation continues. We're not talking about something that will level a city block. We're talking about something that will level cities, whole cities, in one instant of destruction. So let's continue here.
Over time, even more powerful bombs were built, hydrogen bombs. This 1960s airplane carried 5 hydrogen bombs, the red and white things there, and had the power of 500 Hiroshima bombs.
And that's deployable from one aircraft.
And of course, the United States and Russia don't just use airplanes. They have intercontinental ballistic missiles with hydrogen bombs on them. And they have nuclear submarines with missiles. A single Trident missile submarine can carry 100 hydrogen bombs with the explosive power of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. Knowing the power of the bombs and their targets, we can understand the destructiveness and loss of life that might occur if these were ever used. Let us imagine, for example, that the United States attacks Pyongyang, North Korea, the capital, with the smallest bomb carried on a Trident missile submarine.
Small being a very relative term.
500,000 people, about the population of Sacramento or Baltimore, would die.
And those would be civilians.
Nuclear weapons kill people in 4 different ways. In this orange circle, there's a shock wave so powerful that it knocks down concrete buildings and kills everyone within that zone. In the red circle, there's radiation that's released from the atomic bomb as it fissions. The radiation would kill 50 to 90% of the North Koreans over the next few weeks. In this green circle, the shock wave continues out with enough power to knock down residential buildings. And in this yellow circle, 6 miles in diameter, there's a blast of light so bright that if your skin was exposed, you'd get 3rd-degree burns, which can be fatal. And flammable things like leaves, newspapers, and your clothes would burst into flames. And of course, if we attack North Korea, they're likely to attack us back. If they use the same sized weapon that we used, and they've already tested one like this, they could kill 150,000 people in this 6-mile diameter circle in Denver. And these terrifying scenarios I'm talking about are just if each side uses one nuclear weapon. But Russia and the United States each have 4,000 strategic nuclear weapons. That's enough to attack each city with more than 100,000 people in each country with 10 atomic bombs. In a war like that, 400 million people would probably die on the planet, in China, in Russia, in Europe, and in the United States.
And about now is when he's going to start talking about something that's even more terrifying, which is that number barely scratches the surface of how many people would die. Because, as this speaker is going to point out, when people project the losses from nuclear war, the numbers you see like this only represent the immediate effects, the blast, the heat, the radiation sickness, that kind of thing. They don't take into account the after effects that happen because of the war. So let's hear about that.
But wait, that's not all. I've just been talking about the damage near ground zero. And that's all the military considers in their war plans. But there will be collateral effects. Remember the dinosaurs? It was a burning forest that killed 3/4 of the species we know about on the planet. And the same would happen after a nuclear war. Cities would catch on fire and burn.
So for those of you who live in the United States or pay attention to the news in the United States, you may be aware that over the past few years we've had massive wildfires in the drier parts of the country, consuming millions of acres of forest land and crops and such. Now try to imagine what would happen if fires started on that kind of scale, but every major city in the United States had been destroyed and there were no firefighters left to try to contain it. Think about the massive effort the numbers of people, the huge numbers of vehicles, the massive amount of infrastructure that it takes to try desperately to contain just one wildfire. And then think about what those wildfires would do if all that help wasn't there.
It's this damage, the damage the military doesn't even consider, the damage that's just thought of as an accident that might destroy human civilization. Even a war between India and Pakistan, two of the smallest nuclear powers, with only a few hundred weapons of about the size of the Hiroshima bomb, we might die as unintended consequences.
Now remember, a few hundred weapons in total, about the size each of the Hiroshima bomb. That one aircraft you saw earlier had more firepower on that one set of bombs it could carry than the entire nuclear arsenal of India or Pakistan.
That the Indian and Pakistani generals never even gave us a thought about. My colleagues, Luke Oman and Alan Roebuck, calculated the spread of smoke after a war between India and Pakistan. It only takes about 2 weeks for the smoke to cover the entire Earth. And it would rise to altitudes between 20 and 50 miles above the surface. At those altitudes, it never rains. The smoke would stay there for years. This farmer may be in Europe or in the United States, but many thousands of miles from Pakistan and India, is looking at the smoky sky above him and down at the crops that have died in his fields from lack of light and cold temperatures. It's estimated that in a war between India and Pakistan, that we would lose 10 to 40% of the yields of corn, wheat, and rice for years afterward because of the bad weather.
So now we have the immediate dead of a war between India and Pakistan. The blocking out of the sun for years because of smoke in the upper atmosphere that would just not go away because rain would never carry the particles that make up the smoke out of that level of the atmosphere. We have 10 to 40% of the entire world's food production gone. And this is, because of a war between two small countries that are very far away, devastating the food supply for the entire planet. Let's continue.
The entire world only has enough food to feed the population for 60 days unless agriculture produces more food. Ira Helfand, a member of the Nobel Peace Prize-winning International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, has estimated that 1 to 2 billion people would die after a war between India and Pakistan of starvation.
So, roughly 1/6 to 1/3 of the entire planet's population would die in the after effects of a war between two countries whose nuclear arsenals are smaller than what the United States could load under the wings of that aircraft. Really think about that for a minute. Yes, it is. The point being, this entire planet has something like 7 billion people on it. If 1 to 2 billion of them died, that's like 1/6 to 1/3 of the entire planetary population. And that's just from starvation. We're not even talking about the rest of the problem. So let's continue with some even more bad news.
And after a full-scale nuclear war, temperatures would plunge below ice age conditions. We would be in a nuclear winter. No crops would grow. It's estimated that 90% of the population of the planet would starve to death, and civilization would be destroyed. And no one would be safe. Not those in countries with no nuclear weapons, not those in countries that didn't participate in the war, and not those on the other side of the planet from where the explosions occurred. No one would be safe. I bet you're not getting a warm and fuzzy feeling out of this talk. But we don't have to just keep plodding on like we have been, walking toward disaster. We can do things to stop a nuclear war and prevent global starvation and the end of human civilization. In the 1980s, politicians recognized...
So, Shin, it's interesting you say that because There's a famous quote, and I forget who said it, but you could probably Google it. I think it might have actually been someone from the Middle East who said, if World War III is fought with nuclear weapons, World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Pearl Joker, not really, because there'd be no way for you to resupply, and all that would happen to you is you would watch the devastation happen beneath you. Then you would lose sight of the Earth beneath that giant cloud of smoke and realize that you were going to slowly starve to death in a tin can rotating around the Earth.
Dangers of a nuclear conflict and did things about it. Nowadays, politicians don't seem to understand the dangers of these wars, and the younger generations hardly give nuclear conflict a thought. We baby boomers had this drummed into us. In grade school, we were taught duck and cover drills and how to get under our desk in a hopeless attempt to avoid the nuclear explosion. In middle school, our mothers told us, you can't drink your milk anymore, because the 500 atmospheric nuclear weapons test had poisoned the Earth with radiation. And the popular culture was dominated by radioactive mutants, such as Godzilla.
Oh, Shin, it's you. It's all your fault.
Nightmare from Nagasaki and Hiroshima. In the 1980s, I worked with Richard Turco, Carl Sagan, Russian scientists, and others to tell Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan.
Gorbachev was the premier of the Soviet Union at the time.
We told him a nuclear war would cause a nuclear winter that could end civilization as we know it. And they listened. And Ronald Reagan said, a great many reputable scientists are telling us that such a war could just end up in no victory for anyone because we would wipe out the Earth as we know it. And Mikhail Gorbachev said, models made by Russian and American scientists show that a nuclear war would result in a nuclear winter that would be extremely destructive to all life on Earth. The knowledge of that was a great stimulus to us, to people of honor and morality, to act in that situation.
So you have to keep in mind, this was so serious and taken so seriously by the world at the time that even the premier of the Soviet Union and the president of the United States agreed that this was such a horror, such a terrifying possibility, that they had to agree to do something to reduce the possibility of this happening. It was an unheard of level of cooperation between these two countries.
In September of 2017, the United Nations passed a resolution banning nuclear weapons, like landmines. Chemical and biological weapons have been banned. Unfortunately, the nuclear weapons states want to ignore that ban and just plod on like they have been. It's up to us to wake them up before they sleepwalk into a nuclear disaster. What can you do about this? Talk to your political representatives.
So the rest of this video is him just talking about how to contact your politicians and urge them to take action on this topic. But this was such a big deal in American culture at the time that the 1983 movie War Games actually ended with a message about this. The artificial intelligence in this computer, whose name was Joshua, it was named after the son of the programmer who wrote it, has gained control of the nuclear arsenal of the United States. There are no longer any people in the silos, everything is automated, and they are trying to stop this thing from launching the missiles because it doesn't understand that what it's doing is anything but a game. It's convinced that it's just playing a game and doesn't understand that the world will end if this happens. So the hero of the story, I believe played by Matthew Broderick, and his mentor who wrote the AI, Joshua, are trying to get Joshua to learn about the futility of an unwinnable contest. And this is a hell of a spoiler, so if you want to watch War Games, don't watch this part. But this is the ending of the movie War Games.
Put the list back up.
No, we already tried that.
Put it up.
Yes, put it up.
It's not on the list.
What's not on the list?
Go ahead.
It's got to be in there somewhere.
Tick, tack, toe.
You're in. Order to disarm the missiles.
No, no.
Five numbers. It's got half the code.
One.
Put X in the center square.
No.
Guys, I need like 2 minutes here,
There's no
so
way you can win that
finish
game.
watching this
I
and we'll
know
talk
that.
about
It doesn't. It hasn't learned. Is there any way to make it play itself?
Yes, number of players 0.
Seven.
Come on. Learn, goddammit.
Eight.
Must be caught in the loop, storing more and more power from the rest of the system.
9 numbers. 10. It's got the code. It's going to launch.
Colonel Conley, call the SAC. Get me a launch status report. Major Dave, get me the president.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, Colonel?
Sir, all landlines out of the mountain. They're dead. I'm trying to break through on satellites.
Okay.
What's it doing? It's learning.
Greetings, Professor Falcon.
Hello. Joshua?
Strange game. The only winning mood is not to play. How about a nice game of chess?
So this was the stuff that was the nightmares of, the 60s to 1980s. And the message isn't it's who loses the least. There is no such thing as losing the least in a nuclear war. Everybody loses everything. In a full-scale nuclear conflict, like the gentleman at the TED Talk was talking about, everybody loses their food production. Everybody loses access to sunlight. Everybody suffers nuclear winter. Supply chains for everything are destroyed. Nobody wins that. The entire planet goes back to the Stone Age. So there's no which country loses the least. It's every country ceases to exist as a country, and you just have people desperately trying to survive as they slowly die of radiation sickness in the aftermath. There's no winner in nuclear war and no least loser. The entire human race loses. I have played DEF CON, and you know, as somebody who grew up really painfully aware of the threat of nuclear war, doesn't really excite me to play games that remind me just how terrifying this is, because this is, you know, this is real. This is something that actually is hanging over our heads. So if you watch the remainder of this video, and I'm going to encourage you to do that, I need to wrap up because it's time for me to help my wife with dinner. But you're going to find out that it's not just the people in the silos in the United States who are off their rocker and not doing very well and, you know, discovered sleeping in the silos and such. It's the officers at the top who are problems too. You have guys in charge of this stuff, like at the general staff level, who are, you know, getting drunk and pissing off other nations and, you know, like mentally incompetent, and it's horrifying to see just how risky this is. So between the fact that we have political leadership around the globe, I mean, we have Trump who wants to nuke storms, we have Kim Jong-un who's just out of his freaking mind, we have Vladimir Putin who is perfectly willing to engage in genocidal tactics and wars of expansion. You know, we have all these politicians and political forces around the country that are deathly close to being ready to use nuclear weapons at any time. We have gross incompetence on the part of the people who manage this stuff. We have outdated hardware. We have outdated software. We have people who lose this stuff. He talks about an incident in this where a stack of nuclear weapons was left sitting unguarded on the tarmac at a major airport for almost a day and a half. Okay? You know, just watch the end of that video. It'll scare the crap out of you. So it's important that people relearn how serious this stuff really is, and stop treating it like it's a problem that was already solved years ago, because it wasn't. You know, there may be fewer weapons around, but it gives people really bad ideas like the one Godzilla talked about a nuclear war being somehow winnable by losing less than the other side. Because if there are any nuclear weapons and people think a small exchange is winnable, they're wrong. I mean, we even talked about the India-Pakistan thing in that TED Talk. It doesn't take much when it comes to nuclear weapons to end human civilization. Yes, they talk about that stuff in this video, so I urge everybody here to watch the Last Week Tonight video that I showed there. You can see the title on screen. It's called Nuclear Weapons Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Look it up and watch the rest. But Cademon, thank you very much for hosting. For those who came by today, I really appreciate it. I hope that you guys will find further videos also interesting and worth coming to see. And I also hope you will tell your friends about the channel who might want to learn some stuff, talk about some stuff, and, you know, kind of, you know, increase the range of the channel. So I have been talking with somebody about building another Discord similar to the one I have for my gaming channel, except for this channel. So we'll see how that goes. But to those who came again, thank you very much. I will be back around 8 p.m. New York time for some gaming tonight, do a little tank driving, and have a good one, everybody. I'll be back later with gaming, and then again on Wednesday with more Bare Bones Talk. Have a wonderful day.